you lose your friends, people get sick of your games, and they get sick of worrying about you, and they'll leave. And you realize that you're by yourself, and the only friend you have is your eating disorder. Sometimes you don't really care, because that feels good enough. You don't need people. I spent a lot of time being really lonely.
What kind of culture are we living in that 80% of 10-year-old girls don't like their bodies? That should be shocking to every single one of us. And I think it goes back to how we sort of believe it's a phase.
Everything else is good. So if I can just fix this, I'll be the total package and everything will be perfect. I need that control. Everything has to be mine. If it's mine, and I'm the only one that can say anything about it.
It's not whether I can control it or not, it's whether or not my kidneys say, sorry, I can't do this anymore, or your liver, or your heart.
Eating disorders are dangerous because we know they're associated with a very high rate of mortality. People are much more likely to die than others their age. Sometimes that's medical complications, sometimes that's suicide.
It's like this cage of doubt and hopelessness and lies and secrets and disgust. It was just keeping me locked in this place that I just couldn't get out of, even though I could see it.
Hello, I'm Larkin McPhee, a documentary filmmaker. Back in 2000, I produced a film for PBS called Dying to be Thin, about the eating disorders anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. At the time, I really believed that the epidemic of eating disorders was at its peak. But unfortunately, this is not the case. Eating disorders continue to afflict people of all ages and race, and especially young women. Today, I'm here at the Anna Weston House for the treatment of eating disorders. Anna was a young 20-year-old woman who died from anorexia nervosa, despite a valiant effort to overcome this illness. Eating disorders are serious medical conditions that can be deadly. Join us now as we meet some experts and people in recovery who offer an honest appraisal of their struggles to overcome their eating disorder. We hope this video helps you to recognize the warning signs in yourself, a friend, or family member so that you can seek help.
I have always fit like the criteria for someone who's at risk. I'm very type A, very organized, very perfectionistic, very hard on myself. Mostly that came out through school when I was younger, and so, I mean, I think personality-wise, I fit all the characteristics. I do have a little bit of genetics playing into it also, because my aunt and like a few of my other family members have struggled.
We know that there's a really strong genetic biological basis for eating disorders that somehow gets triggered at some point, possibly through puberty, possibly through environmental exposure to trauma or stressors, possibly in combination with the sociocultural messages around being thin and being perfect and being, appearing a certain way. You take all of those things together and you pair them with perhaps some temperament traits that we're starting to understand more clearly. So that kids particularly who might be a little bit more perfectionistic, more exact, more anxious, there seems to be a predisposition there that anorexia can come in to those kinds of traits, and out of that sort of trait, sociocultural emphasis on weight, and this messaging about eating and weight and food, out of that can come an eating disorder.
Eating disorders, especially bulimia, is like very, very common in the Black community. But it's just that nobody wants to talk about it. And the idea that, your daughter could have an eating disorder, that's too white culture. And so you don't want to acknowledge it because that makes you feel like it's not something that you belong with and it's not who you are.
The peak onset for anorexia is about 16. The peak onset for bulimia is about 18. Most people who we see with anorexia or bulimia have symptoms for at least a number of months and often a few years before onset, but the symptoms will kind of build for a while. And I think a lot of things lead to those being the peak times. I think that part of it is the influence of puberty. I think part of it is social pressures about eating and weight and shape and appearance. And part of it is that I think that's an age where the societal messages about thinness and weight and dieting, which are there kind of for, throughout life, really start to hit their peak, I believe, around that time.
It's always, well, what's considered sexy? Well, what's in the movies? What's on TV? What's on magazine covers? I know that magazines is something that people talk about a lot, but it's very relevant. And it's the same thing for men. Look at men's health. Way to get six-pack abs, way to work out your biceps better. Even though a person, say an individual, might not find those certain characteristics, say, attractive in a significant other, it doesn't mean that that's not ideal. And so it's what's ideal is what's constantly ingrained into us. And what's ideal and what's realistic is so vastly far apart, I can't even begin to describe.
Well, the most common trigger is attempts to lose weight. But things seem to trigger those. Comments that people make trigger those. Participating in activities where there's an impression that losing weight may be useful trigger those. That can be athletics, it can be dance, it can be other appearance-focused things. There are some people for whom trauma triggers eating disorders. Maybe experiencing depression or anxiety can play a role, triggering perhaps. A mixture of things.
I remember wanting to lose weight and being, okay, well, what number's good? It was always a focus of what number. Well, almost a year later, I'd finally achieved that number. I just couldn't stop there. I had felt so good about my achievement. I had lost a significant amount of weight in a healthy way up to this point. And no, that wasn't enough. It was, well, gee, I wonder how would I feel if it was one less, two less. So, and it wasn't even something that I really thought about really at first, but it was there. And then I remember weighing myself, like, say, a week or so later and seeing that it had dropped again and going, ooh, wow, I can get to a lower weight. Apparently I can keep going. And so it was a game. What can I do? How low can I get? I mean, really, what's possible?
I've always been told I'm a bit of an overanalyzer, and so I just always took everything to that stage where it had to be that intense and where it had to be that big of a deal. Like my brother saying that I was fat once probably shouldn't have been that big of a deal, or twice, or a couple, however many times it happened. It shouldn't have been that big of a deal. It should have been he was probably mad at me, and he was probably mad that I wasn't doing something for him, so he decided to say something hurtful. But, it was not just that. It was not just, my mom and my brother being skinny, and it wasn't just everybody around me being skinny. It was just me feeling like I wasn't, and I was so different because of this, that it had to be that big of a deal.
Something switched inside of me where it was not about just being healthy anymore, but it was about being thin. And it was about being thinner than all my friends and not just looking like them. And it was about, it took, on an extra level from just being this person, or from just wanting to fit in to wanting to actually be better.
I remember specific times being in, say, middle school, junior high, and hearing about eating disorders and thinking, oh my gosh, how could somebody be, involved in something like that? Oh my gosh, it's simple, just eat, or, thinking those things. And so when I realized I had one, there was, all this stigma that I had on judgments from other people with eating disorders. And being a man, I think, made that even worse. It's like, well, this is a female illness. This isn't something men get.
People who have eating disorder symptoms, particularly starvation from an eating disorder, can have effects in all systems in the body. We worry about the impact on heart rhythm and heart function a lot. We worry a lot about bone mineral loss and osteoporosis. That's something that we see commonly in other clinics among otherwise healthy people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. But we see extensive osteoporosis in people with eating disorders in their teens or early 20s sometimes. We see impacts on the kidney, impacts on the liver, blood counts, a wide variety of impacts.
Not eating has a huge effect on your brain, and you just feel kind of stupid all the time because it takes forever for you to string a sentence together, and you can't concentrate, so school is a nightmare. And it's kind of like you'll be in the middle of a sentence and completely forget where you are and what you're doing and why you're talking at all to begin with. And it's kind of just like, you kind of feel like a zombie and you feel like a shell of somebody. And to me, that's kind of the worst, is being tired all the time and everything hurting and being sore. And I just don't want to go back to that, because being healthy just feels better.
When people think of eating disorders, they tend to think of what is anorexia, because you can see that somebody's really underweight. So people in some ways expect people to be underweight if they have an eating disorder. The reality is that most people with bulimia are very normal weight, and you can't tell anything by looking at them. So that's the first tricky part, because if you're struggling with bulimia, now you have an illness that nobody can see, nobody can tell you have, and you can hide it.
I would have to eat something at dinner, eat enough to make it look normal, but then after that, I would kind of purge it. And then, after being recovered for a year or so, it was kind of like that superhero feeling of like, I can eat whatever they eat, but it doesn't have to affect me the same way. And so that's when it kind of developed into more of like that kind of a cycle.
So if the eating disorder comes in and implements a whole set of rules and has this promise to it that if you just follow the rules, everything will be fine, that focus can really narrow out everything else. Then you don't have to think about all the other things in life if you're just following the rules, and you'll get the achieved outcome, which is, I feel safe, I feel structured, I feel in this sort of held place. Except that that held place can kill you, because the eating disorder eventually will have such rules as you shouldn't be eating, you should be purging everything, what have you. So that limiting of the world, is sort of the closing of a window, feels comforting in a way to people who don't have a large emotional repertoire of coping skills.
Someone's mad at me, and I think it's all your fault that they're mad at you. You're a bad person. You don't deserve to be happy, healthy. You should not eat. It always goes back to you should not eat. Or somehow things would be better if you were thinner.
Society tends to sort of minimize them to some extent, and that does tend to keep people from getting help for them sometimes. Tends to keep people from asking about them, tends to keep people from getting referred for treatment.
You're completely out of sync with your physical self, which is really dangerous, because then you push yourself to limits that you shouldn't be pushing yourself to, At one point when I was running for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours every night, I obviously wasn't listening to my body, because my body definitely would have told me to stop. And it's just like, with purging, you don't think that it's that bad, because, sometimes when you're sick, your body makes you do it anyway. So it must not be that bad for you. But, when you have 6 or 7 or 8 cavities, and when a chunk of your tooth falls out after you're recovered, mind you, for literally no reason, it's kind of like, that's dangerous. Anything that separates you from your body is dangerous, because you don't understand what you're doing to it.
With anorexia, it's a little bit more of a steady march. You can tell as the weight gets lower and lower, the body reacts and becomes more and more ill. So the difference is that sometimes you can almost predict what might happen with somebody with anorexia. With bulimia, you can't predict at all. And that's when people die shockingly and surprisingly, that really come as a complete shock to families, to care teams. That's the piece to be really concerned about.
When I kind of started to come out of denial is when I would go to treatment and they would say, you have to eat this. And I'd be like, no, like, I can't, like, why are you crazy? Like, I'm not gonna do that. And I just kind of like really got really defensive, and I started to think, is this normal? Is this normal to feel this way? Like, to be this upset over, like, say a cookie? Like, no, that's not normal. And so that's when I started to realize, like, maybe I do actually have a problem. And that's when I started to notice that my anxiety was super high too, was when people are making you challenge that anxiety. Because what brought it down was using symptoms, was staying within what I was comfortable doing.
I call my eating disorder Mia, for bulimia. And little by little, Mia would creep back into my life. And pretty soon, it is overall and consuming more than it ever was before. And I knew that if I didn't get help, the only other option for me was death. Not because I wanted to kill myself, but Mia was going to be the death of me. And that without help, there's no way I would get better. Not at all.
Whatever medical complications they have in relation to the eating behaviors, that needs to be treated by the physician. And then we have the psychological factors that need to be treated by the therapist that really look at, well, how can we get you more emotional coping skills? How can we help you to tolerate distress? How can we help you to tolerate emotions and communicate effectively with what you need? And then there's the nutrition piece. None of the other pieces can happen if the person isn't well fed. And that's one of the sort of baseline pieces of treatment, that you have to be well fed in order for your brain to be fully functioning, in order for your medical status to be okay, in order for the therapeutic work to actually be able to be done. That a starving brain doesn't really think all that well. So the nutrition piece is really important, to get people eating regularly, eating an adequate amount of food, and really repairing the nutritional chaos that's been going on.
Psychiatrists are involved typically for a few different reasons, partly as a part of the overall evaluation, partly to help think about medications and what role they might play, partly to think about whether things like anxiety or depression or other kinds of psychiatric problems are important and need to be addressed. We see lots of people who have eating disorders who also have some degree of depression or anxiety or obsessionality or various things that we frequently can do quite a bit to effectively treat.
Eating disorders are a medical psychiatric illness. They're an illness. Nobody causes their child to get cancer. Nobody causes their child to have an eating disorder. And when you find out that your child has cancer or an eating disorder, you do whatever you need to do to help that child get better. And that's exactly the place to think about eating disorders. It's an illness. Let's figure out what we need to do to help this person get better.
There are so many times where, like, I put on weight and everyone assumed, great, you're better, you're fine now. And in reality, those are the times when you need the most help. Because that's in the times inside when you're screaming and you're used to using your body as your voice. It's a lot easier to look like you're dying and to look like you're struggling, because then you don't have to say anything.
I knew that if I didn't move on from this, I'm going to be stuck in this place in my life. Stuck meaning I can't progress. How am I ever going to get another job because I don't have the physical strength? How am I going to go to college and be able to study and have the brain power to actually learn and absorb and really grow as a person? And answering those questions is everything that's in, I like to call it my life worth living, everything that's in my life worth living does not occur with an eating disorder.
I actually had fun with kids my age, and I hadn't done that in a long time, you know, real genuine fun. And it was kind of like that, I feel like, was kind of the biggest kind of I want to recover message, because I realized that I could have fun again. It might not happen every day, but I could relate to people, and I could have fun with people, and that was just probably the greatest thing that I could want to live for.
One of the newer treatments is called family-based treatment, or FBT. Families often feel really helpless in the face of an eating disorder and just aren't sure what to do. So what FBT does is say, you as a family can help your child resolve this eating disorder, and here's how you can do it, and we will help you along the way. So the family comes in, is involved in that treatment. Sometimes siblings are involved. It can be whatever that individual support system is. And the family is really taught, in a way, how to support people through treatment, how to get them to eat, how to get them to finish a meal, how to get them to finish 3 meals a day and the 2 or 3 snacks that they need, how to restore that weight. And then once that nutritional sort of chaos is resolved, then we can move on to the more developmental struggles that people have, how to be themselves in this world.
Each day that goes by is another missed opportunity. Why wait? Why wait? And I used to say, oh, I'll just wait till then. Like, God, I tried to bargain so much with the eating disorder. I'll just wait until this time to get better. I'll just wait until I go into the hospital and then I'll get better. I'll just wait. You know, it was always just waiting. And I look back, I think, how much time did I spend waiting?
Even in the throes of the illness, when they hear people like me say, recovery's possible, you can get better, you can do this, it feels really unattainable to them. And I keep saying it because people try really hard, they get to recovery and they say, you know what, when I heard that I thought you were crazy, and now I know you're right. Now I know it's true. That nobody gets to recovery and says, oh, that wasn't worth it. I don't know why I did that. Everybody who keeps trying, who gets to recovery and keeps trying and doesn't give up says, this was the hardest thing I've done, and I'm so glad that I did it, because this life is so much better than the eating disorder life.
Being able to be more of a grown-up, you know, going to work and hanging out and being able to take care of myself and do all these things, and it's real control, not like eating disorder control, because that wasn't positive and that wasn't going to get me anywhere. But it's real control in the direction where my life is going. And just knowing that, you know, I'm gonna be going to college in the fall and things like that, it's just, you know, positive control, things that I can do to really make my life worthwhile.
I feel like I didn't have anything to replace my eating disorder with. And now I feel like there isn't room in my life for it anymore. Like, there just isn't. If there is, I'd have to start giving things up. And the things that I've created and that I've found are too important. I don't want to give them up.
I thought there's no way that these people can help me. I'm too big of a mess. No, nobody can help me. I'm too different, I'm unique. That all changed. I got help. And looking back, you know, I never would have thought that I could have made it this far. I never thought it. I mean, it's so far beyond what the things that I realized. And so if you get help, and if you're focused and you want to have a life, just know that there's a life beyond this restriction within an eating disorder. There's so much more. I'm 29 years old, and in the past 2 years, I have discovered more of myself in 2 years than I have in the first 27.
I never, ever thought that I would be sitting in this chair saying that, you know, I feel like the worst is over. It's loosened its iron grip. And now it's just kind of like, maybe like down the hall, you know. Will it ever like completely leave? I don't know, but I can still live my life. And I want to. That's what's different.
If there's one thing I've learned about the treatment of eating disorders, it is to never give up. Every one of us can play a valuable role in helping our friends or family members get well. If you're concerned about yourself or anyone else, talk to a health professional at your school or go on the internet to seek information and help. Remember, we all need to speak up for the seriousness of eating disorders and support their treatment, just like we do any other life-threatening medical illness. I'm Larkin McPhee. Thanks for watching.